Stillwater, Oklahoma, a town filled with both its city residents and college students, home of the university with America's brightest orange. But one of the interesting parts of Stillwater is the history through its streets and buildings' names. Many of the streets and buildings' names are named after people who have history in Stillwater, and most of them can be found in Fairlawn Cemetery. Names such as Duck Street, Jardoe Road, Duncan Street, and many others. As Fairlawn Cemetery being the oldest business in Stillwater, this cemetery helps by keeping the history alive of its people from the past. One of the people who has worked a lot with Fairlawn is Lou Watkins, the chairman of Fairlawn Cemetery. Watkins and most of the people who help with Fairlawn have a reasoning on why Fairlawn is important to Stillwater's history.
And our rationale behind that is this. You probably die twice. The first time when your body shuts down, you're buried, you're cremated, whatever. But your body is gone and you're dead. But when nobody remembers you, when nobody ever says your name again, when nobody ever has any reason of why you lived, what was the purpose that you were on this earth for, you are really gone, and you are really gone. So that's what we say, you die twice. There's a story that two guys had a duel, and one killed the other, and they just left him on the hillside, which was right up here on the highway. And eventually somebody came along with a shovel and said, we better bury this guy. Now, that's a wonderful story, but I don't think it's probably the truest one. The one I think is probably more true is that there really was a duel in town, and a guy was killed. And they said, what do we do now? And somebody said, oh, take him out on the hill and dump him or whatever. And that's how Fairlawn began. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it makes a good story.
Even though no one knows the true story of how Fairlawn became a cemetery, there are records that showed when it started. Records of Fairlawn have shown that the cemetery started in 1886. Some of the first people who now rest in Fairlawn are people from the land run. Some of them even fought in the Civil War. Judy Ringwell, a genealogist who does registrar work for Daughters of the American Revolution, Nation Society of the Union, and both the Mayflower and Jamestown Society, knows much about the early burials of Fairlawn.
In 1889, the unassigned lands in this area that were part of Indian Territory were opened up for the land run of 1889. And it started up, the border for it was up just a little bit north of Airport Road here in Stillwater. And the people that came from all over. Some came from the north, down from Kansas, some came from the south, and Oklahoma City was even in that part of the land run. But Stillwater, we got a lot of the Union soldiers coming down from the northern part of the states, and they came and settled and found land and raised their families. So there's generations of leaders buried out here that are their ancestors that came in the land run.
One of these settlers who was a part of the land run and rests in Fairlawn is Louis J. Jardoe. He is one of the people who has a road named after him in Stillwater. Jardoe was known for supplying bricks for most of the first buildings of Stillwater.
Louis J. Jardoe homesteaded in today's area of South Stillwater. He was one of the land run people, and he started a brickyard and built many of the early Stillwater buildings. One of the buildings was the old Opera House, which is over on 9th Street where the antique mall store is now. He has a lot of family that if you look around at different generations that are younger, you'll see the name Jardoe. And when you drive right in on the front entrance, there's Jardoe gravestones, and one of them is one of the oldest gravestones out here. It's a little child that Grace Jardoe, that was one of his children.
Another settler of Stillwater who rests in Fairlawn is Jake Katz. Katz was a German who was also Jewish. Katz had his own store in Stillwater called Katz Department Store. Today the store is now a restaurant.
Jake Katz was a German Jewish that came over in after the land run started in the 1890s, and he was a merchant, and he started what everybody that even up until the late 60s was Katz Department Store. It's now a restaurant there at the corner of 7th and Main. He is buried in the Jewish section that is over on the east side of the cemetery. He brought a lot of his family over before the Holocaust started in like the 1938, 39, and some of his siblings came over in the late 1800s too and helped him start up in the store. So you see a lot of names, and over there are buried in that part of the cemetery.
Katz and members of his family are buried in the Jewish section of Fairlawn. Members of his family who come to Fairlawn to pay their respect have an interesting way of doing it.
It's interesting too because the Jewish have a habit that when they come to visit somebody's grave, they will put stones on top of the monument. So when you walk over there, it's kind of reassuring to know there's been a lot of people because you'll see a lot of stones stacked on top of the monuments.
Not only are they people who have helped make Stillwater's history, but there are also people who have helped make the history of Oklahoma State University. One of the people who has a building named after them is Henry Iba. Most people in Stillwater know him for his name, being a part of OSU's basketball arena. Judy Ringwell's father was a close friend to Iba.
My father was in athletics at OSU when he first came to college. Well, in the summertime, they would have the guys that were on scholarship work on building. They were then building, it was the 4-H buildings, what they first called it. Well, my dad was one of the guys that they helped put bricks on there. Well, he also knew Mr. Iba. So he stayed friends with all the people here because we just moved a little ways away. And he later was on the athletic council, and Mr. Iba was on it, and we would stop by their house sometimes when we'd come down. Mr. H.P. Iba was probably one of the most famous coaches around this part of the world for the years that he was here in Stillwater. He started here in the early 30s as a coach. He coached several different sports, not only basketball. He had a lot of talent and really did well with his teams, and he was a good recruiter. Towards the end of his career, he strictly coached basketball. He had a family here in town. He had a son named Mo, and he played basketball for Mr. Iba. And he ended up being a coach somewhere later. But Mr. Iba stayed in Stillwater after he retired.
At the time, most people across the country knew Iba for his talents of being a basketball coach at OSU, but most people may have not known what his favorite show to listen and watch was.
They used to travel a lot by train, going to different sports, and whenever they were on a trip and away from Stillwater, well, Mr. Iba always told Bird that he had to plan the guys to eat right between his famous soap opera he loved to watch, and that was As the World Turns. And he would always want them to stop anywhere they were. And whenever he was at home and he was at Gallagher Hall, he would call Doyne and say, "Get my soap opera on, I'm coming home for lunch." And I would see him out about town later on in later years before he passed, and he'd always holler at me and say, "Hey Judy, are you still watching As the World Turns?" So I always got a kick out of that, thinking of that very famous basketball coach watching soap operas.
As Iba now rests in Fairlawn, most people today will still remember him as both a terrific basketball coach and a great person outside the arena.
I had no idea how great the man was as a child until I became older, and I was just in awe that I knew this man. He was such a terrific man.
Iba was not the only person in Stillwater who was known for OSU athletics. During the mid-1940s, Oklahoma State had a phenomenal football program, with the 1945 team winning the national championship. One of the top performers on this team was Bob Fenimore. Fenimore is one of OSU's greatest football players of all time. Fenimore's daughter, Beth Fenimore Attess, is proud to represent his legacy.
He grew up in Woodward, Oklahoma. My mother did as well. They were high school sweethearts. He came to OSU because they were the only ones that offered him a scholarship. He majored in education. He played here at Oklahoma. It was Oklahoma A&M then, and that was from 1943 until 1946, that season. And they were the 1945 national championship team. He was third in Heisman voting that year, and like I said, was the first round draft choice of the Chicago Bears and played 1 year. He is in the Cotton Bowl Hall of Fame, and he's also in the College Football Hall of Fame.
Fenimore's nickname on the team was the Blonde Bomber.
I'm not real sure. I think it was just because he was a halfback and he was so good at football. He still has the record for the most interceptions still here at OSU after all these years.
While Fenimore was attending OSU, his high school sweetheart, Vetta Jo, went to college at the University of Oklahoma, OSU's rival in the Bedlam series.
Yeah, they were high school sweethearts. And she went to OU, as a matter of fact. And he came here to OSU, and they didn't have cars, so he would hitchhike down to OU every weekend to see her. One of his favorite stories was before the Bedlam game, OU hired some private plane, and they flew over the practice area and dropped leaflets that had like A&M 0, Oklahoma 100 or something. But anyway, they ended up, I think they won that year. I think they beat them 55-0 actually. Yeah. It was, Mother was an OU fan. Her family all went to OU, but the minute she married Daddy, she is a Cowboy fan through and through.
As Fenimore now rests in Fairlawn, Attess still represents his name when people talk about the 1945 national championship team.
And I just remember everything I was involved in. I was on a swim team, and he would come to the practices and help, and he just was always very supportive of us, our whole family, my sister and me, and was just someone I looked up to all my life. I still tell people who I am. I still say Fenimore just because I want everybody, I don't know what, well, I don't know where I'm going with that, other than I just like to use his name and let everybody know, because people still in Stillwater still remember him.
Fairlawn has over 12,000 headstones that help give a second life to the people who are buried in the cemetery. However, some of these graves do not have a headstone, making them lost underneath the grounds of Fairlawn.
We have roads in Fairlawn, particularly in our older sections, and we're not exactly sure if it was wise to put those roads where we did. And I think all of us would feel better if we knew that no one was buried in that area.
This has been an issue for Fairlawn when trying to give people who are buried a second life. Luckily, there are some professors of geology at Oklahoma State University who are interested in helping locate these hidden graves.
And so the Department of Geology, Camelia Knapp is the chair, voluntarily said that they had the equipment to come out and check. And so one of the professors of geology here at OSU is coming out right as we speak and checking under the ground of the older sections of the cemetery to see if there are actual burials there.
One of the professors who is helping with this project is Dr. Ahmed Ismail. The type of machine he is using uses sonar waves to see what is underneath the ground.
And one of these technology is a ground penetrating radar. This ground penetrating radar used to send the signals to the ground. These signals are electromagnetic waves, like the waves that we use in our microwaves at home, but at some certain frequencies. And when these signals go to the subsurface or below the ground surface, it kind of hit whatever materials in the subsurface, and it bounces back to the same machine. The machine has transmitter that sends the waves and a receiver that receives the waves. And based on these reflections or the signals that we get from the ground subsurface, we can analyze what are the under the ground surface and detect any anomaly. And this anomaly is always associated with something buried, either stones or rocks, different rock size, or different type of soil or water table. Once we analyze the data, we'll be able to tell if the machine will be successful detecting these undocumented graves or not.
Some of these graves have actually now been located. Now the only issue is trying to match the graves with its documentations.
We know that there are probably people buried there, but we have no record of who they are. And we've gone through the records that we have on paper, and we're trying right now to match what knowledge we can piece together. It's kind of a puzzle, and if anybody wants to help us work on it, we would love to have some help. But we're trying to piece together the paper records that we have with the actual physical cemetery, and if we can locate people's graves, even though there's no marker on them, we will create a marker for that grave, and we're beginning to do that with some Civil War veterans. We have about 8 Civil War veterans that we've been able to identify. Civil War veterans that we've been able to identify.
Judy Ringwell and a friend of hers has helped match one of these documentations to its grave.
There was a soldier buried out here from World War I, and my friend and I were out here. She is an author, and she was writing a book, and it's just about ready to be published on World War I. And she had found in information this man by the name of John Bate. John C. Bate, he served in the U.S. Army, and he was born in 1891 and he died in 1972. Well, she had him listed as being out here, and we found him on the list, and we looked and looked and we never could find him. So we went to the office and talked to them, and they looked up to see who was in that grave, and it was this John C. Bate. Well, we felt so bad that we decided we were going to buy him a military gravestone, because normally the families can send for those and get them for their family. Well, it appears that no one ever did anything for this man. So we got with Bill Bernhardt, who was the owner of Strode Funeral Home. I asked him, I said, Bill, what do we need to do? Because I knew he'd ordered a lot of them in the past. And so he helped us, and he helped us with the forms and get it sent, and then Mary Jane and I paid for it.
As some of these graves are still trying to be located, Watkins hopes they will bring back some of Stillwater's forgotten people.
I mean, those people are forgotten, and if we can restore their memory, who knows, maybe their family's still here.
With Fairlawn being over a century old, there have been issues of keeping its grounds maintained. Issues that could prevent the second life of people in Fairlawn from living on.
If you look out across the cemetery, you see that many of the stones, especially the older monuments, are leaning. Well, we're not sure whose liability that is. If we can't find the family to try to repair that, then do we let the stone just fall over and break? And so we have a real dilemma about that, but it's really expensive to try to fix and repair stones and to get them upright when they're leaning. So we've been working with David Crane at Old Station Monument Company, And he is willing to help us with that. He's been wonderful to work with, and he has the equipment to do that, and he has the knowledge to do that. That's one of the real needs that we have, is to hire David or whoever to come in and help us repair the leaning stones.
Not only dealing with the issues of headstones either leaning, falling, or crumbling apart, another problem that Fairlawn has is having long-term staff members. With over 12,000 headstones to weed eat around and over 40 acres to mow over, it is hard for Fairlawn to keep its staff members, especially during the summertime.
And then, of course, the ongoing staffing need is always great, like weed eating. Can you imagine weed eating 40 acres, every monument? And so in the summertime, anybody that comes out here who looks like they want to weed eat, we will hire. And so that's another need that we have.
One of the biggest supports of keeping Fairlawn maintained is the community around it. Anytime that Fairlawn has had to look for help due to crucial time, the people of Stillwater and others outside of the town have always been there to lend a hand.
I'll tell you, the people in Stillwater have stepped up in every single need that we have expressed a concern about. For instance, one time somebody knocked in our front door, and we did not have a surveillance system out here. And so I did my email list and said, would anybody be willing to help us buy cameras so that we'll have some security at Fairlawn by the end of that day? We had enough money to buy 8 cameras, and so you're on camera right now. But every single time a lawnmower breaks down, I don't know if you prioritize crises, but that's a real crisis in a cemetery, is when your lawnmower breaks down. And so we've had 2 break down the last 3 years, and in one case, I think the tractor mower was bought in 1982. So I mean, it was beyond repair, and we had to have a new one. And we got a good deal from a company here in town to help us financially with it, but we still had to raise $11,000 for it, and we did that in less than a week. But the contributions come from all over, and not just Stillwater. We have an email list of people outside of Stillwater as well, and people just send checks in for every single need that we have expressed. We don't raise our hands and holler help until we really need it. But when we have, people have responded. And so what you're seeing here is donations and volunteers. And it's really a testimony to a wonderful community here in Stillwater, because these are people here who care about this community. And you're seeing the evidence of that at Fairlawn, because we could not have the cemetery at this level without our help.
Another issue is running out of land in Fairlawn. Watkins believes in at least 30 years, Fairlawn's lots will be all filled up.
We think we have about 30 years of land left, and we have two sections here that are hardly used yet. We've sold very few lots in those, and we think with the lots that we have remaining in the south sections here, we have about 30 years left. And so we really need more land, probably.
One of the ways that Fairlawn is thinking of to help prevent this issue is providing a columbarium in the cemetery.
The place where cremains are buried or stored is called a columbaria. And that would be a project that we really need to undertake here, is to provide a columbaria so that families could store their cremains here. And if we did that, we wouldn't need as much land, because of course the little cremains box are small. And that's what my choice is. I think that's what I want for me. And I think about half the people in the country now have made that choice. That's what they want. But for the traditional burials, we still have about 30 years of land. And after that, I don't know what we'll do. I'll let somebody else take care of that.
Whoever that next person is, there's a wonderful chance that they will keep the second life alive of the people in Fairlawn Cemetery. To Fairlawn Cemetery, living twice does not mean getting a second chance in life. It means having a person live on in memory for what they did in the community. People such as Jardot, Katz, and Iba, who have buildings and streets named after them, will always live their second life by never being forgotten. Even if the person is lost underneath the ground and found later in the future, those people will not be forgotten. As the city of Stillwater grows larger, so will its number of streets and buildings. Whatever name they will be called, they will probably be named after someone who is living twice in Stillwater.
The closest thing I've ever heard was a little boy that was the son of a sexton that we had here. And when he would come out with his daddy, every time when he pulled up here, he turned and looked down into the southwest section of the cemetery and waved at something. And his daddy said it happened numerous times, and that little boy clearly thought he was waving at something, and so we have no idea what, but that's the closest thing I can come to telling you a ghost story.